Welcome to Breaking Through, a blog sponsored by Church CMO that introduces you to people breaking through their personal barriers and some practical information how to break through yours. Today we are talking with Mark McDonald, a church communication consultant and best-selling author, Bible teacher, and an all-around good guy. Let's meet Mark. It is my pleasure today to introduce one of the top communications and advertising consultants for churches in the country, Mr. Mark McDonald. Mark has over 30 years of experience working in advertising, communication, design, and writing, not only for churches, but for a period of time at the largest ad agency in Eastern Canada. He is currently the president and senior brand strategist with the firm he founded, Be Known for Something. And as of today, he is the author of a brand new book, Be Known for Something, which is the number 3 bestseller in Amazon's Christian church growth category and number 4 in the church leadership list. And it only launched yesterday. Mark, welcome to Church CMO's Breaking Through blog and video podcast.
Thank you for having me. Even just hearing all of those things about me being an author, I still don't believe it.
That is so cool. Congratulations. It is, that's got to be so exciting.
It is. It's exciting to know that all my attention to grammar and writing through high school has somewhat paid off, I guess.
You know, but did you find that a lot of those grammatical rules have changed since we were originally learned them?
Oh my goodness. And I mean, seriously, we have a lot in common, more than just our first name. You understand communications as much as I do. And I think that you're much younger than me. But other than that, what's interesting for me is that everything is kind of in flux, and people's attention spans have gotten so short nowadays that even when you're writing, you have to write in a totally different style than what you would expect that you'd have to write in. If you're writing a blog, you pretty much have to do, the importance of the headline and getting it right. And then you have a subhead, and then people jump over the first paragraph. They don't even read it. And then they just jump to bullet points because people just don't have time. They're just scanning so much information all the time. So then when I started writing the book, I started thinking, well, here's this group of people who aren't necessarily reading. And all along, I mean, anyone who's ever heard me in a conference knows that I continually say more and more people are reading less and less. And then I decide to write a book this long. Are you kidding me? Who's going to read this thing? And that's why when it went up on Amazon and our website, I told my publisher, I said, well, hopefully I'll sell 1 or 2. And so I'm really happy with it. But that whole question about grammar and how it all works, things have gotten very short. Sentence fragments are more interesting now. It kind of stops and jars people. So things have certainly changed.
Absolutely. Speaking of conferences, I first met Mark about 3 years ago at a Center for Church Communication Certification Lab. And, he's been a resource, a mentor, and a friend ever since. Mark, the thing I like most about you is that you still take my phone calls. So realizing this might be the last one, let's dive in.
Sure.
In your opinion, in working with churches of all sizes around the country, what do you think is the biggest challenge the average U.S. church faces as they communicate to their community, both internally and externally?
Wow. I think that we have to kind of tackle the big issue. And the big issue is that a lot of churches are closing. They're shrinking in size, and they get to a point where they just can't afford to have a building and keep everything going. So that's pretty devastating. And knowing that, almost 80 to 85% of the churches in the nation are in decline or stagnation, where they're just not seeing growth, there is a huge problem. And we're quick to say, wow, we have the solution, the best product in the entire world, and Jesus Christ. when you look at all the studies and research that are done on perception, Jesus ranks really high. People think the world of him, and that, he's thumbs up. Whatever he says, I think that we should probably listen to. So here we are, we have this great product, and yet the world has pretty much turned its back on the church, and the perception of the church now is extremely low. So in secular marketing, we would call that a distribution problem. You have a great product and we're not taking it to market, and that comes down to communication. So I think that a lot of this problem rests solely on the church communicators. And anytime communication breaks down, it's because they aren't connected as accurately to their community. So I think that the main problem is that the church has got to get back to reconnecting with their community and doing it in such a way so that they pay attention, which I think is our issue.
Mark, and ever since I met you, I've used this phrase in talking with churches and pastors, and truly implore them. And I usually give you credit. I'll say that, that you've got to be known for something, because the alternative is to be irrelevant. Is that kind of how you developed that idea, that concept, was because churches were struggling to find shelf space in their community?
Well, it's interesting because every person that's listening to this, someone will say, "Hey, have you gone to that new restaurant?" It's like, "No, I didn't." And then they say something about it, and it's like, "I didn't know, or else I would have gone." And in the same sense, the church, we've been talking, but people aren't listening and they're not resonating. And anytime that you don't resonate, you will never become known for something. You'll just be one, oh yeah, that's the church down the road. It's just another one of the churches. And we have to figure out, so what will we be the go-to for the people in the community? And I think that right now we're not the go-to for anyone except for somebody who would regularly attend our churches. So we have to change that. We've got to kind of, decide how are we going to be known differently than all the other churches, and where somebody in your community isn't looking for church, what are you going to be known for that they would be looking for?
And I think that's where a lot of churches and pastors maybe get a little frustrated or discouraged, even, I guess is even a word, because they feel like they're in touch with a felt need in their community, but then the community doesn't respond like you would think. What kind of advice would you give that pastor that is seeking to be known for something, but is kind of getting frustrated in that process?
What a great question. Because, see, it's kind of like when you tune in late night television and the infomercial comes on. Sometimes you look at that product and you think, okay, well, I certainly don't need that product. And then you get sucked into the message because that commercial, even if it's just a short commercial, they instantly connect with pain that I didn't even realize that I had. But it's like, you know what? I think when I flip an egg, it does go all over the place. Oh my goodness, it's all over the stove. It's on the floor. I need the egg flipper. And then they produce the solution. And the cool thing about info commercials, even though you hate watching them, you always end up watching far too much of them. Like, you're flipping through and it's like, oh, that's good. And we have to fully realize as the church that we know what will get people's attention. You either say their name, you say their pain, or you suggest a solution for any of their major concerns. And if you say those three things enough, then they'll lift their heads and go, did you want me? I'll listen to a little bit of that. And if you really become known for something and your communication is working well, you'll sucker them in just like that TV infomercial, because they might say, well, oh my goodness, I didn't know I was listening to a church thing. I don't want church. But you want them to get the message of your church. So if, I love telling the story of, in the Bible, how Jesus sat down at the well, and the woman came along, and he could have talked to her about anything spiritual, but instead he engaged with her on a temporal need. And we like to call that a thread. It's like that thread of conversation that happens because of somebody's need. And he mentions water to her, and she says, sure, I'll talk to you about water because that's what I'm here for. I mean, duh. I mean, Jesus is sitting at a well. Of course she's there for water. So it just made sense. So then he engages with water, but then almost instantly, as soon as he gets her attention and they start talking, then he makes that turn and he starts talking about the spiritual. What if I could give you water that you never thirst again? And again, it's well, duh. She's there for water, and she's had to walk a great distance, pick up the water, and go back to her home. If I never have to do this again, I'm in. And see, our community has some type of need like that the church can say, you know what, that's what we're all about. We want to help you on that temporal need. Say it's, healthy marriages or some type of a component that that your community is dealing with. If you can then start talking to them on that level, it's the same thing that the infomercials do. Talk to them about their pain, talk to them about the solution to that pain on a temporal level. But the big thing is that today the church does that kind of well, but we've worked with a lot of churches that don't make the connection between that temporal thread to the eternal thread. And that's what we as a church, we need to figure out. Okay, so we want to be all about, say, healthy marriages, but that's really not what we're doing this for. We have to connect ourselves to the scarlet thread of Jesus Christ and the redemption that he brings.
I love that analogy of the infomercial because, a big part of that kind of advertising is consistency and repetition. Is fighting through the frustration, because I've seen not only churches, but nonprofits and other organizations kind of stop 3 feet from the gold, so to speak, before they really, made an impact because they were on the right track. They just gave up and switched gears too soon.
Well, oftentimes, I mean, the concept of the book, I mean, when it's be known, in order to be anything, you have to have some consistency. And in order to be known, you have to make sure that it's connecting and engaging with people. The whole concept here is you need to talk about it until you're blue in the face, because you're going to get sick of it. And if you're not sick of it, then you haven't said it enough. You have to make sure that everyone around you picks it up. And when you stop and think, it used to be that every time the church doors open, we were there. I mean, the McDonald family was being trucked into the church. But nowadays, people aren't going to church the 3 or 4 times a week that we were. Instead, they're going 1 to 2 times a month. And when you stop and realize a person's walking in from their cars and their busy lives, and they're walking in and they're touching your church for maybe an hour to 2 hours every other week or every third week, the ability for them to take in messages and hear repetition, you have to repeat yourself over and over and over again. I have a Sunday school class where a great group of people. We're up to like 160 people in our class. And every week when I talk to them, I realize that I have to repeat everything 3 weeks in a row in order for someone to pick it up once, which is crazy. I feel stupid every time that I say, and guess what? And it's like every person that was there last week hears it again. And I'm amazed at how many people come up to me and say, oh my goodness, I'm so glad you brought that up. And it's like, weren't you here last week? And they're like, yes. So, don't you remember I said it last week? And people are only half listening. So we have to say things more, but not necessarily all at once. So we have to kind of stretch them out over a period of time. So if you feel like you're just struggling with something, take a look at how consistent you are and how much schedule do you have to make sure that people are hearing things more and more.
That's great advice. So then, Mark, what compelled you to convert this and transform this concept into a best-selling book?
Wow, that still sounds strange. Thank you, though. I guess it was about 4 years ago. I was actually working for a church as director of communications, and as I sat down, I had been somewhat training churches and working with churches, and realized, okay, there needs to be some type of a manual, a guide to why we do what we do, because oftentimes we'll come in and say, as the expert, this is the way it needs to be done. And sometimes the church will ask why. And sometimes I'll think, oh my goodness, I got to suggest why. But I really wanted to, after 3 decades of doing this, okay, I wanted to slow all my thought down and really write why we do what we do as church communicators, and put the whole process into a book. And then even the last part of the book goes really, really into the technical of church communications, where it's how do you work your website, social media, email, how does all of that work together in your digital hub? How do you create ministry tiering? How do you put it all into practice and have a transactional communication strategy? So it starts out kind of philosophically, and then we get into, okay, so now that you want to reconnect with your community, here's how you do it. Now that you want to revitalize your reputation, here's how you do it. And then here's how the whole structure works when you get to the end.
So who is this book written for? Who's the audience? Is it just church communicators or pastors or church? Who will get a benefit from this?
No, I really, really am targeting with the book, because I mean, when it comes down to it, not every church can afford me. I wish they could. I wish I could just give it all away. Someday, if God blesses this book and I become a rich, filthy rich person, which I don't think that's going to happen. But if it happens, I would love to give it all away. For those people who don't have a large staff, or they're not large enough to be able to afford somebody like you or someone like me, it's $15.99. So that's who I really wanted to target. And because of that, there's not a lot of people in church communications in smaller churches like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm really targeting the pastor. I have a pastor's heart. I love pastors. I really want to say, okay, you're a communicator. Now slow down what you do every week and look how church communications, if it's done properly and you slow it down, you're doing the same thing. You're really, when you're preparing a sermon, you're thinking, oh yeah, Jack will be there or Susan will be there. And you're thinking about specific people in your congregation, and you're really preparing, oh, I know they're going to ask this question. So then you walk through, because good communication rises and falls in the audience. So you got to figure out who your audience is. So the book is written from a pastor's heart, even though I'm not a pastor, but to a pastor's heart. And then also for church communicators who maybe are in smaller ministries, but it can also work into the larger ministries as well.
Fantastic. Without giving away the surprise twist ending, what's an important point or idea or an action item you want the reader to take away from the book? Maybe just
Oh,
one.
yeah. Um, be known. We've already talked about that, and I could probably talk about the word for, be known for something. I mean, the church has been against things if you ask perception in your community, oh yeah, we know what you guys are against, and we have to start being for something. But that's not it. The last word though, something. It is so hard for a ministry to get a thread. I think that over and over we see churches who come up with their tagline and it's 3 concepts or 2 concepts, but it's like, put on the big boy pants, make the decision. You can come up with one thing that you really want to resonate, and more people will remember you if you have one thing that you're telling them is their benefit, instead of some nebulous mission statement, vision statement craziness that's compacted into a tagline that has far too many concepts to it. So just really, get as consistent and as simple as possible, and more people will actually be attracted to your message.
Absolutely. I see that every day, churches that are trying to be everything to everybody, and they what ties back to the mission statement. Well, your mission statement's a little broad.
Yeah, and Mark, I mean, since nobody else is listening, it's just the 2 of us.
Sure. Be honest.
Exactly. Okay. If pastors were listening to us, that whole concept of what your sermon should be like, it's exactly what we talked about at the very beginning. People are listening so abbreviated. They're not paying attention. Our attention spans, they say, are less than a goldfish now. And here we are. We keep talking about, well, if you want to be known for something, you got to be known for one thing. When pastors are working on their sermons, you can't have umpteen dozen points to your sermon and have anyone hold their attention through it all. Those days are totally gone. So I would recommend for every pastor, try to come up with a 3-point sermon and then hack a couple out of them, because more people will remember a sermon that's about one thing than about 3 things. More people will remember a sermon about 2 things than 3 things. So just try to get it as simple as possible. I know with our class, I promised them that they will come every week and they will hear the Bible taught, and there'll be 1 point, 1 takeaway. And I mean, it can be done. It's with my prep time. I start reading scripture about a week before, and then I start coming up with my outline. And then as it gets closer and closer, I'm just thinking, that's not as important. No, that's not as important. I'm just honing into that one central theme. And I would recommend everyone do that.
That's a golden nugget right there that, any pastor that hears that, I think could get a lot of mileage implementing that into their ministry. I want all our listeners to go out and get a copy ASAP of Be Known for Something, because we need to knock Francis Chan out of that number 2 spot.
Yes.
Francis, I'm just kidding. Really.
And who is Francis Chan anyway, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, he's number 2 right now. So seriously, where can our audience go and find this great resource and purchase copies for their teams?
Absolutely. And in fact, at the end of every chapter, there are discussion questions. So it's set up for the pastor who wants to lead his team. Or, there was one pastor that got back to me and he was like, oh my goodness, I need to walk my deacons through this. And what it does is it helps shift their attention to the things that are necessary for good church communications. So it's set up for team reading. If you're looking for multiple packs, we actually have them on our website. If you go to beknownbook.com, it'll go directly into our beknownforsomething.com website under the book tab. But it'll connect you with single copies as well as multiple copies. But also you can get your digital Kindle version on Amazon as well as paper copies on there as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. Mark, thanks so much for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule. I know you've got a hectic week set up, and I'm just truly appreciative of you sharing some time with us, and wish you continued success with the book and with your ministry. Thanks for joining our conversation today. We would love it if you shared your questions or comments below, and any ideas for breaking through stories you would like to know more about. Remember, you can get Mark's book, Be Known for Something, at Amazon or at beknownbook.com.